Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Q&Play, my monthly Q&A series where I answer your questions in a rambly, unscripted format. I hope you all enjoyed the Lunar New Year, and apologies for the mediocre Apex Legends gameplay in the background. I usually main Valkyrie, on a different system. Anyway, question 1 from Team SHDW. What are your favorite personal tips for new DMs and players? I've gone over DM and player advice for brand new people before, but I do have some tips that I haven't talked about yet. My number one piece of advice that I haven't talked about is a mentality that I just don't see enough people considering when going into Dungeons & Dragons or any TTRPG, and that's you should look for a good group, not necessarily a good game. You need a good group first, then you can figure out what kind of game you want to play together. If you don't mesh with the people at the table, it doesn't matter if the game is the perfect tone that you want. It's gonna fall flat without the right group to play with. On top of that, different groups are going to have different expectations for what they want out of D&D. Some groups are going to want an in-depth Call of Cthulhu investigation, some groups are going to want a Critical Role style epic fantasy adventure, some groups are going to want a number crunchy dungeon crawl. There are tons of different groups that are going to want to run different types of games. But notice that the group comes first. If you find a group that you're compatible with, you're more likely to enjoy whatever different type of game you play. So yeah, this goes for DMs as well. Find the right players, find the right people to play in your game. Getting the right group together is imperative when playing Dungeons & Dragons. So yeah, look for people that you're compatible with. What are some gestures of appreciation that your players have done? My players don't exactly buy me a ton of gifts. The gift of them just playing in my game is good enough for me. I'm fine with just them playing. But they have gotten me some gifts. One of them got me dice, and another, she made these awesome pins. Now, a little bit backstory here. In my first campaign, there was this NPC named Roran that the party absolutely loved. He was just this normal dude. He was a guard who was really nice and really cool, and ended up, going with the party on many an adventure. He was just a normal, down-to-earth guy with a fiancé and a future kid on the way, and it was just a really sweet relationship between him and this crazy party fighting dragons. He was just the everyman, and they really loved him. So one day, the player behind the druid, she brings to the game this little plastic baggie with these pins in it, and these pins all are like hand-painted, and they just say, "I heart Roran." And it's so awesome. She gives them out to all the players and the DM, myself, because we all really liked Roran as a character, including me, the guy who played him. And I just thought that was so cool, because this was a character that I didn't think would mean much. He was just a guy that helped them this one time, but they clearly liked him, so I put him in the campaign more. And the fact that one of my players went out of her way to create these little pins for an NPC that I didn't really think much of at first meant that they really did care about this guy. Now, of course, by this point, Roran had become a major recurring character, but the fact that he was originally like a side character, I mean, it meant a lot that this random character I created stuck in the players' minds this much. And yeah, that's the sweetest, coolest gift that anyone's ever given me in the D&D context. Question from WaveShock007. Mr. Crispy, this question has been haunting me for as long as I can remember. I need the answer in order to sleep. Why do we drive on parkways and park on driveways? I spent an alarming amount of my life delivery driving for money, and I'm just gonna say it. Even though I spent a lot of time on the road and in a car, I have not the faintest clue why we drive on parkways and park on driveways. I mean, yeah, technically you park in a driveway, but you also drive out of it when you need to leave, right? So, yeah. There you go. Hope you can sleep now. Question from Paul Hesketh. Have you ever thought about quitting TTRPGs entirely? If so, what made you decide against it? I have never really thought about quitting TTRPGs entirely, though I have thought about quitting main campaign running, like as a DM. Running a main campaign is a lot of work and effort, and if you are unaware, my first ever main campaign, my first ever long-form D&D campaign had a that guy in it that caused a lot of issues in my D&D life. It was not good, and putting all that work and effort into a game and then having it just feel so stressful. I mean, it was anxiety-inducing sometimes to play with this guy and to play this campaign. I was running Curse of Strahd at the time, and I love Curse of Strahd. Like, listening to Curse of Strahd got me into playing 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons back in 2016, 2015 or something like that, whenever Dice Camera Action came out. And so I was really attached to this module, and seeing it fall apart in front of me like this, it just really, really sucked. On top of that, I also have spiraling thoughts. Somehow I did not mention this in the RPG Horror Story video, but one thing that this guy didn't do on purpose, but absolutely did, was trigger spiraling thoughts, which, if you don't know what spiraling thoughts is, basically when I have something bad happen to me or I get a bad scenario or thought in my head, my brain will just run with it, with the scenario in my head getting worse and worse and worse and giving me more and more anxiety. I'm getting more and more stressed out. So, like, for example, if I'm driving on the road and I hit a bump in the road, my brain might think, what if that was a person? Now, obviously, that is not possible. There is no possible way that was a person, but what if? And then my brain just starts spiraling down and down and down as I continue to get stressed over this hypothetical situation of what if the bump I just hit in the road was a person. It is ridiculous. Now, what does this have to do with Dungeons & Dragons? Not much. I just wanted to rant about how annoying spiraling thoughts are. But anyway, this guy triggered my spiraling thoughts because when I was playing D&D with him, every minor inconvenience, every little nitpick that he had for me, I would just start running with this idea in my head that I'm a terrible DM and everyone hates me. And it was really, really bad. I mean, it got in my head, and at the end of that campaign, I mentioned in the RPG Horror Story video that I stopped running it. I just stopped the campaign. At that moment, there was a couple days where I was just like, I am not running D&D again. I'm not cut out for this. And eventually I realized that these people wouldn't be showing up to my game if they didn't enjoy it. And also that a lot of my anxiety didn't come from the fact that I sucked at DMing. It came from the fact that that guy was acting annoying as hell and was nitpicking my every move and doing a bunch of other stuff that, well, you can check out my RPG Horror Story video for 10,000 subscribers if you want to see more of that story. That guy was really only like half of the problem though, the other half being spiraling thoughts and anxiety, and in recent years, I'm doing much better. I'm much better with handling my own bad scenario energy that pops up in my head, and much better at keeping a grip on what is really a problem and what is real, and not getting stuck in these imaginary what if this horrible thing happens scenarios, which is much, much better. Yeah. Question from Pepjin Poolman. What's your opinion on the growing asexual representation in popular media? Do you feel represented by characters like Todd Chavez from BoJack Horseman or Florence in Sex Education? I will say that Sex Education scene is really, really good. Now, if you have seen the asexuality scene in Sex Education, it's pretty much perfect. It emotionally moved a lot of people in the community, and there's a reason why. It felt like real, true representation. Even though Florence is not a main character, I think that's part of the point. Florence is just a normal person who came into the show. She's just a normal person, nothing crazy about her. She's not some insane alien or anything like that. She's just a normal high school student or secondary school student, because, you know, they're in Britain. Making Florence a normal student means that asexuality is also normal. It's just something that is a part of people. It's not some weird, wacky thing that needs to be obsessed over and that people need to point out. Asexuality is no longer the other, at least in this show's universe. It's just a normal part of somebody's life. And that is the ideal situation, at least for me. I no longer want asexuality to be this weird thing that I need to explain to every single person whenever they ask me about it. I just want it to be normal. I do feel represented by most asexual characters, and frankly, I think any asexual character, unless they're a horrible villain that needs to be destroyed, or a person who needs to be proven wrong about their sexual orientation, unless that's the case, I'm pretty much good with any asexual representation, mostly because the more representation we have, the more awareness is spread, the more asexuality is normalized. Caduceus Clay in Critical Role, you had Varys in Game of Thrones. I mean, these things are all awesome, and I want to see this continue. So yeah, I am happy with asexual representation. The thing with asexual representation that I definitely don't want is stereotypes. I don't want every asexual character or aromantic character to be this higher-than-thou intellectual. Those are fun characters, but I'm seeing it pop up more and more, with the most popular asexual characters being that emotionless, higher-than-thou intellectual type, which is fine. I think that that is a character type, but not every asexual character should be that type of character. That's another reason why I really liked Florence. She was, again, just a normal person, not like a higher-than-thou intellectual genius. Creating this asexual stereotype of the higher-than-thou intellectual makes them seem more pretentious, and, again, doesn't help with normalization. Anyway, there's my basic thoughts on representation in the asexual community. Overall, I think it's good. Question from Monarch Malarkey. Do you have a favorite film, comic, literature, or video game which helped inspire one of your player characters? I DM exponentially more than I play, so most of what I talk about is going to be towards NPCs, locations, storylines, that sort of thing, but this also absolutely applies to the player characters I have made. Everything that I make is based off of something. Some video game I was playing at the time gave me an idea, or some movie that I was watching at the time gave me an idea, television show, whatever. It happens all the time. Everything that I do in D&D is based on something, but not in the way that Monarch Malarkey is asking. It's not like, for example, I made a character called the Sovereign that was based on Daenerys Targaryen. However, that's not really true. The Sovereign and Daenerys are very different characters. The Sovereign was based on the Emilia Clarke Daenerys Targaryen's aesthetic, not necessarily her character. I just loved the aesthetic of this warlord standing in a field of ash, a powerful army at her back, dragon wings, immaculate regal robes and dresses. I love that idea. Kalia Solfero, the DMPC/player character, recently turned into a player character that I made, and I made a video about, linked in cards if I remember. She is primarily based on Arya Stark and Dishonored's Emily Caldwin, but not necessarily their characters. I just love the idea of this assassin powered by supernatural magic, which is a trait of both Arya and Emily, and I rolled both those aesthetics into one. The fur trim of Arya's cloak, the formal wear of Emily Caldwin mixed with her hand crossbow as the weapon. It created this very distinct, very cool look. Pretty much everything I make is based on these aesthetics, these looks that I come up with in my head based on the things I see in film and video games. The vast majority of things that I make are based off of looks, aesthetics. That's why Pinterest boards are so important for when I'm creating an NPC or a player character. That's why I want to get commissions done for a bunch of the characters that I've made, both NPCs and player characters, because I want to see this vision in my head realized in a drawing. But yeah, I hope that wasn't too rambly. I just love doing that sort of thing, and that is where I get all of my inspiration and a little glimpse into my creative process when making characters. Final question from Destroyer Inazuma. Do you feel that even post-pandemic people will play D&D/TTRPGs online a lot, or do you think online D&D/TTRPG will gradually fall in favor of in-person D&D/TTRPGs? Thank you. You're welcome. While I think it is possible that D&D Online will decline post-pandemic, I don't think it'll decline much. For a lot of people, including myself, it's just more convenient to run a game online. For starters, online tabletops are getting more and more elaborate with more and more features, and while the only one I've ever used is Foundry, that tabletop is amazing. I mean, it is so unbelievably good, and any problems I do have with it, there are plenty of fan-made modules to add or change those features. I mean, it's so good, and it has so many features that make my D&D game more immersive. For a lot of groups as well, it's just not practical to gather in person. People live all across the country or all across the world, or the drive is just simply not worth it for a D&D game every single week. Now, for groups that moved online specifically because there was a pandemic, I don't know if those people are going to stay online. A lot of groups that go in person prefer in person. I don't really have a preference. I see pros and cons to both, but yeah. Do I think D&D Online is going to, die off? Definitely not. Absolutely not. A lot of groups that went online due to pandemic reasons will probably go back in person, but I don't think that's going to negatively affect that medium in any way. It's just going to be individual groups changing the way they play when it's safer to play in person. Alright, and that is all the questions I have today. If you guys enjoyed this episode of Q&Play, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of my content, I have a campaign diary podcast that is going to be continuing this week. So if you want to check that out, you can go down to the channel. And also while you're there, subscribe to get notified of our content when it publishes. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories, thoughts, tips, whatever, go down into the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment Valkyrie to reference my favorite Apex Legends character and to let me know you made it to the end of the video. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.